Hello and welcome back to FPVtips. I'm George and today we're having a look at the GEPRC CinePro 4K cinewhoop. It seemed to me that on the cinewhoop front there have been a lot of advancements lately, in particular models such as the GEPRC CinePro that carry a Caddx Tarsier 4K camera with two separate sensors definitely catch the eye and excite me. In this review and setup guide, we're going to have a look at the advanced version of the drone with the FR Sky XM Plus receiver. One of the quads I've flown the most during 2019 is the Mobile 7 HD, which I absolutely love flying. And in general, I prefer, and I started with 5-inch drones, but there's something super cool about being able to whip around this little quad and just fly it in parks without disturbing other people. My only desire with the Mobile 7 HD was that it would have a full range receiver, as the built-in SPI-based receiver only gets you about 100 meters or so of range. This was the main reason why I was very curious also to try out the GEPRC CinePro, as it comes with a full range receiver. When I think of the GEPRC CinePro 4K cinewhoop unboxing experience, I think of two things: minimalistic and high quality gear. Once you open the box, you are presented a quad, which pretty much looks like a piece of art, but more on that in a second. The quad is wrapped in protective film. You get a card with the VTX frequency table, some stickers, a couple of Velcro straps, antenna tubes, and an extra set of spare props, which are different than the ones you already get with the quad. Those extra spare props are the Dow prop, Cyclones Q2035C, and the ones you get on the quad are the Emax Avon 2-inch props. The components are very high quality, the quad is gorgeous, and the assembly work top notch. Shiny solder joints, well placed antennas, great components. In terms of specifications, the GEPRC CinePro comes with a sturdy high quality carbon fiber frame. It's in a dead cat shape with a 115 millimeters motor to motor diagonal distance versus 69 millimeters between the front and the back motors. This is great because it makes sure that the props are never in your shot. The ducts are made out of thick plastic and not flimsy at all. The props are secured with 2 screws each. Also note that the quad comes configured in props out mode, so pay attention to that when you're swapping props. I fly most of my quads in props in mode, which I believe to be a bit more common. The quad comes with a metal cage that hosts the Caddx Tarsier 4K camera, which is easily the star of this whole show. The camera tilt, as you can tell, is not at all aggressive, which is somewhat expected when we're talking about a cinewhoop. And the goal is probably not so much to rip packs like crazy, but rather capture slower, more cinematic footage. Plenty of space on top for mounting a battery, as well as 2 slots for guiding the Velcro straps through. The receiver antennas are mounted on the front arms pointing backwards at a 90-degree angle to each other. The back VTX whip antenna is away from the props and it won't get caught. The VTX supports up to 500 milliwatts, and we have an XT30 plug for batteries. The motors are the GEP GR1105 5000 kV motors, and the recommended battery is a 4S LiPo for those. The camera comes with these 2 separate camera sensors, one for the FPV feed and one dedicated for the 4K or HD video recording. And here on the bottom is the FR Sky XM Plus receiver, zip tied under the camera ports. In terms of setup, here's what we need to do to get up and running. We need to bind the receiver to the radio, insert an SD card, install the Velcro straps, configure RSSI, channel mapping and modes in Betaflight, and configure the Caddx Tarsier 4K camera via the Caddx app. Let's start off with binding the receiver to the radio. The process is just as usual whenever you're using FR Sky XM Plus receivers. You need to put your radio in bind mode, press and hold the bind button on the receiver while plugging in a battery. The receiver will then bind. After that, turn off the binding function on your radio, unplug the quad, and finally power it on again. If all went well, after the final power cycle, the XM Plus will have its LED in solid green to indicate that you have connection. We need to install an SD card. After all, we're cinewhooping, so we need to grab a hold of all that sweet footage. It's a fairly straightforward process. The only thing is, the ducts are a little bit in the way, but this is solvable by just pushing them slightly down carefully, which allows for just enough space for you to insert the SD card in the slot. Next, we're gonna install the Velcro straps. This is also straightforward, but depending on what batteries you're using, you might be able to get away with just using one strap versus having to use both of them. In my case, I use both. Just guide the straps through the designated slots on the top of the frame. Next, let's step into Betaflight. We're going to configure RSSI channel mapping and modes. The first thing you notice is that the micro USB port is somewhat tricky to access. I'm happy to report that it's still accessible if you have a smaller, slimmer cable, like in this example. I had this cable lying around and I was able to use it to configure the CinePro. Alternatively, you could also grab an L-type right angle micro USB adapter. That should get you going. Worst case scenario, you might have to unscrew the motors to take off the duct and plug in the USB cable, which is quite the hassle. Because we have the XM Plus receiver, we want to have RSSI. The way we set that up in Betaflight is by going to the configuration tab and locating RSSI ADC and make sure it's turned off. Then jump onto the receiver tab and set the RSSI channel to aux12. And finally, on the OSD tab, enable the RSSI value to allow displaying it in the OSD. I mentioned channel mapping, and it's quite important to double check those. My radio by default runs in TAER channel mapping mode, and the GEPRC CinePro came with its channel map configured to AETR, so I had to switch those around. Finally, let's jump into the modes tab and configure some modes so we can actually arm our quad. I have this convention where my arming switch is channel 5 on aux1, and this is the right hand side 2 position switch on my radio. Then my modes are on the 3 position switch next to it, and those correspond to channel 6 or aux2 in Betaflight. If you're using a Taranis radio like I am, you want to add your switch sources to channel 5 and channel 6 in the radio mixer screen, and then assign aux1 to ARM and aux2 to the different modes that you're using in Betaflight. I have angle and horizon mode in that switch setup, but by default I just start in acro as that's what I really use for flying. And here is the rest of the Betaflight configuration of the GEPRC CinePro 4K cinewhoop. Before we head outside, we need to configure the Caddx Tarsier 4K camera, and to do that we need to download the Caddx FPV app from the Google Play Store or from the Apple App Store. Maybe a thing to note here is that if you're going to be providing power to the whole quad while doing that configuration, you probably want to be quick, as the VTX tends to get pretty toasty pretty quick because you're not flying around and it cannot cool off. The camera board has 2 buttons on its side. One is for powering it on and off, and the other one is for initiating the Wi-Fi connection. You want to press the Wi-Fi button for about 8 seconds until you see a blinking green light from the camera board. Then we're going to open the Caddx FPV app and tap Connect Camera, and that will probably take us to the Wi-Fi screen where we need to tap on the Caddx created network. The default password is 12345678, and you can change that in the options later. Finally, once back in the app, you can tap the Access Camera button, which should now at this point give you the live camera feed. If you're getting stuck and unable to access the camera, try stopping the 4G or LTE on your phone. I'm not sure how that's related exactly, but after doing it, it did solve the issue for me and I was able to access the camera just fine. And going over all the available options in the camera, right off the bat we're presented with the different resolution options. We get anywhere from 4K 30 FPS down to 1080p Full HD options, 2.7K 60 FPS. You can enable or disable audio, which is surprisingly usable given how the props sound on such a tiny quad. You can change the video encoding between H.264 and H.265, adjust the white balance, exposure and ISO. I didn't touch any of the default settings in my tests. If you tap device settings, you get to the second screen of the options, and here you probably want to change the default start action from loop video to normal video to allow for normal video recording as soon as you plug in a battery. You can also change the default Wi-Fi password as mentioned, video standard, and factory reset camera settings or format the SD card. Another issue I ran into while setting the camera up, I was connected to the camera and I could see the live video feed, and I decided to test the camera by recording a short clip by pressing the big red record button. At this point the camera complained that there was no SD card inserted, which clearly wasn't the case. But I'm happy to report that after formatting the SD card via the app, the issue was resolved. It's probably a better idea to do that formatting in any way to avoid potential disappointments of missing or corrupt footage. And speaking of which, I had my fair share of the latter and the former. My biggest issue was with my last battery of the day, always ending up to be a weird 1.4 megabyte file, corrupted and unplayable. I've recorded at 4K 30 FPS, at 2.7K 60 FPS, and I know it's not the quality or the speed of my card, because it seems to be handling the file sizes just fine. And I know I'm not running out of space either. I feel like for whatever reason the camera is not able to write that last file. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, but nevertheless, if it happens to me, it could probably also happen to other people. So it's better if you are aware of this. One thing I will try next would be to unplug and replug the battery and see after that last flight if I give it time to write the recording to the SD card. That's my tinfoil hat assumption of what might be going on. But I'll make sure to post an update as soon as I figure out more about the issue. For now, take it for what it is, but this is definitely adds to the poor user experience of the Caddx Tarsier camera. Because I'm doing the same thing on my Caddx Turtle V2 or the Runcam Split Mini or the Runcam Split 2, and all of those allow for the recording to be saved straight up to the SD card with no issues whatsoever. On the other hand, I also need to mention that even if the user experience with the Caddx Tarsier is somewhat finicky, Caddx Tarsier 4K camera is outstanding and does remarkable things for our hobby. The FPV feed is easily one of the best I've seen to date. The recorded DVR is really crisp. The 4K sensor is pretty unrivaled too. And at least as of now, there are only so many 4K FPV cameras on the market. So finally the time came for the maiden flight of the GEPRC CinePro 4K. And I started off by recording a 4K 30 FPS flight. Unfortunately, that flight ended up with a failsafe about less than 100 meters on my 8 o'clock. I'm not sure what that was about, but the GEPRC records black box data in built-in onboard flash memory, and I will investigate that further. In general, I enjoyed flying the CinePro a lot. It was very different than most other quads I had flown to date. I love 5-inch drones and zippy micro quads with brushless motors, but the GEPRC CinePro is purely different, and that's okay because it has a different purpose. I tried flying it cinewhoop style as much as I could. Small camera tilt, then slow and smooth, zipping around. My first observation was how easy it was to operate in tight spaces. You could get it to move very slow and steady and stow so much almost as if standing still. This is particularly important if you're shooting in 4K 30 FPS and want steady and slow shots. I think the GEPRC CinePro would be doing remarkably well in such conditions. And that's not to say that the CinePro can't pull its weight, it could zip around pretty nice too, even if not at top speeds. Check out the slightly faster paced 2.7K footage, and you can get a sense for how the props sound through the camera's microphone too. I mentioned the maiden flight resulted in a failsafe, and although the quad dropped from pretty low, I still lost one motor screw and the Caddx Tarsier's Wi-Fi antenna. The camera position also changed due to the impact. My advice to you is make sure you tighten all your motor screws every few flights or so, or secure those in place by using a Loctite solution of some sort. In addition, maybe consider taking off the Wi-Fi antenna and just keeping it away from the craft while flying. If I'm honest, I'm not sure what exactly it accomplishes, because you can still access the camera just fine. Maybe it only affects the bandwidth. So if in case you're copying over files over Wi-Fi, that would now be working slower without the antenna. In my case, I prefer to copy my files straight from the SD card. As far as the change camera position goes, also make sure to tighten those screws nicely, but I'll be surely paying attention to those and why they keep on getting loose over time. For my testing, I've carried that out mostly with the Avon Flow 2-inch probes that come pre-installed on the quad, and I'm currently waiting for some nice better weather for trying out the Dow Pro props and see how that works out. In terms of batteries, I use the 4S batteries for my tests, such as the Turnigy Graphene 500 mAh battery and the JNB 4S 520 high voltage batteries. However, I did charge those only to 4.2 volts. I think the performance was slightly better with the GNB batteries in general, maybe slightly longer, but for the most part it was rather similar. And that's understandable also, given the GNB batteries offer you 20 mAh more. They also fit a bit better and are less clunky than the Turnigy battery. And if you go the extra mile and actually charge them up to 4.35 volts, you could go even further. So what's the verdict then? Is the GEPRC CinePro 4K for you? The answer is probably that it depends. If you're excited to do some cine whooping, or you want to make your entry into this subset of FPV with the best components, highest quality build, best 4K split type camera on the market, then by all means go for it. The GEPRC CinePro 4K is well worth the money it asks from you, and you will have an awesome time flying it and shooting cinematic videos safely really anywhere. It's a great offer, tough to beat. The quad flies superb and is decently tuned, flies smooth and is ridiculously easy to handle in very tight spots. If you want a quad that's closer to a freestyle racer type of a drone, I'd hold my horses on that one, but that's not to say that the CinePro is slow or anything. It's plenty fast, but it should not be compared to freestyle or racing drones, as it's designed for a fundamentally different thing, and it does that exceptionally well. This is truly a cinewhoop in the best possible meaning of the word, and a top-of-the-line cinewhoop too. I'd wrap it up by saying that the GEPRC CinePro 4K is one of the easiest ways to get into high-quality 4K cinewhooping. Subscribe for more FPV tips, and happy flying!